The Caine Mutiny wasn't just a courtroom drama about naval duty and discipline. It was a pressure cooker, a film born from anxiety, ego clashes, creative fear, and a post-war America struggling to understand authority itself. Behind crisp uniforms and sharp dialogue, chaos erupted. Actors clashed. The Navy watched closely. A legendary performance almost changed forever. Today, we reveal 20 weird, shocking facts. Watch closely. Humphrey Bogart almost refused the role that redefined him. Humphrey Bogart doesn't want this role. Not at first. He's known for toughness, confidence, control. But Captain Queeg is not that man. He's brittle, nervous, unraveling. Bogart fears the audience will laugh at him. Not fear him, not respect him. Laugh. What audiences didn't know is that Bogart worries this character will damage his carefully built screen image. Studio executives push back hard. They don't want another safe Bogart performance. They want risk. Eventually, Bogart realizes something. This isn't a weakness. It's a transformation. He reshapes his posture, alters his voice, introduces nervous tics that aren't in the script. The infamous hand motion with the steel balls. His idea. It isn't a heroic role. It's a human one. And that choice permanently shifts how Hollywood sees him. The steel balls were never in the original script. Captain Queeg's steel balls become one of the most unforgettable visual symbols in classic cinema. But they aren't written anywhere. They come from Bogart himself. During rehearsals, he experiments. He wants something physical, something repetitive, something unsettling. He notices how anxiety manifests through small habits. So he brings the balls onto the set. At first, the director hesitates. It feels distracting, too obvious. But once the cameras roll, everything changes. The sound, the rhythm, the way they punctuate Queeg's unraveling mind. The balls become a metronome for tension. What audiences didn't know is that the prop almost gets removed halfway through filming. Test screenings suggest it's too strange. Bogart refuses to give it up, and cinema history quietly thanks him. The Navy watched this film very closely. This isn't just a movie, it's a statement. The U.S. Navy worries. The Caine Mutiny will undermine authority and discipline. The idea that officers might question a captain on screen makes officials uneasy. Scripts are reviewed. Dialogue is examined. Tone is scrutinized. What audiences didn't know is that the Navy insists on balance. Yes, Queeg may be unstable, but the film must also show the danger of rebellion. This tension shapes the entire production. Scenes are rewritten to avoid outright condemnation of command. The courtroom climax is carefully framed to protect the institution, even while exposing individual failure. It isn't propaganda, but it isn't rebellion either. It's a careful walk along a razor's edge. The storm scene was brutal to film. That typhoon sequence looks terrifying because it is. It isn't digital. It isn't safe. The ship rocks violently. Water crashes in unpredictable waves. Actors struggle to stay upright while delivering lines. Equipment gets soaked. Crew members are injured by flying objects. What audiences didn't know is that multiple takes are ruined because actors physically cannot keep their footing. The exhaustion is real. The panic is real. Bogart later admits that filming those scenes leaves him shaken, not scared of water, but of losing control. And that fear bleeds into his performance. It isn't acting. It's survival. Fred MacMurray's casting shocked everyone. Fred MacMurray is America's nice guy. Light-hearted roles, gentle authority, familiar warmth. So when he's cast as the defense attorney, people are confused. What audiences didn't know is that the filmmakers intentionally choose MacMurray to disarm viewers. They want someone who feels trustworthy, someone who seems reasonable. That choice makes the courtroom scenes hit harder. Because when MacMurray's character dismantles the officers on the stand, it doesn't feel cruel. It feels logical, calm, inevitable, not anger, but precision. The casting flips expectations and quietly proves that tone can be as powerful as dialogue. The film's structure mirrors moral collapse. This movie doesn't just tell a story, it fractures one. The first half feels like a standard naval drama. Authority, routine, order. Then something shifts. The second half becomes interrogation, judgment, consequence. What audiences didn't know is that the screenplay is deliberately built like a psychological descent. Scenes shorten, conversations sharpen. The camera lingers longer on faces. Not action, but reaction. The structure mirrors the crew's trust collapsing piece by piece. It isn't about mutiny. It's about doubt. And once doubt enters, nothing remains stable. Bogart's health quietly affected the performance. During filming, Humphrey Bogart isn't well. He's tired, weaker than usual, struggling with energy. What audiences didn't know is that this physical decline subtly shapes Captain Queeg. The slumped posture, the pauses, the sense that effort costs something. None of this is written. The director chooses not to hide it. Instead, he leans into it. Queeg isn't just unraveling mentally. He looks worn down by command itself. And that makes the performance hauntingly authentic. The courtroom scenes were rewritten constantly. No part of the film changes more than the courtroom. Dialogue is adjusted daily. Legal phrasing is debated. Emotional beats are tested and discarded. What audiences didn't know is that these scenes are filmed almost like live theater. Long takes, minimal cuts. Pressure on actors to deliver perfectly. Mistakes mean starting over. The tension you feel? That's real fatigue and concentration on display. The courtroom becomes a battlefield of words, not weapons. The film sparked heated debate after release. When the movie premieres, the reaction isn't calm, it erupts. Some critics praise its courage, calling it one of the most honest portrayals of leadership pressure ever put on screen. Others bristle, arguing that the film dares to question authority at a time when obedience is still treated as sacred. Veterans weigh in through newspaper columns. Letters pour into editors' offices. Discussions spill beyond theaters and into living rooms. What audiences didn't know is that the debate quickly moves into professional circles. The film is screened privately, not as entertainment, but as a warning. Not to challenge leadership recklessly, but to recognize when command begins to fracture. Power, the film suggests, becomes dangerous when it stops listening. And the movie refuses to soften that message, even under criticism. This film quietly changed how Hollywood portrayed authority. Before the Caine Mutiny, leaders on screen are usually unshakable. They issue orders. Others follow. The camera rarely questions them. After this film, something breaks. Authority figures are no longer automatically right. They hesitate. They misjudge. They struggle under pressure. Hollywood begins to explore the idea that command is not just power, but burden. What audiences didn't know is how many later films echo this shift. The unstable commander, the divided crew, the moral gray zone where obedience clashes with conscience. The cost of following orders without question. This movie doesn't shout its influence. It plants it quietly. And suddenly, authority in cinema is no longer untouchable. It's human. And if you're still watching, go ahead and like and subscribe, because the next facts expose choices filmmakers never advertised. The final speech almost played very differently. The ending you know is not the ending they first planned. Early drafts of the courtroom speech make Greenwald colder, sharper, more judgmental. His words feel like a verdict instead of a reflection. On paper, it works. On screen, it doesn't. Something feels wrong. What audiences didn't know is that the filmmakers recognized the danger of turning the finale into a victory speech. This story isn't about winning. It's about consequences. So the tone shifts. The dialogue softens. The emphasis moves from blame to regret. The courtroom becomes a place of reckoning, not celebration. Justice is served, but satisfaction is denied. That single adjustment transforms the film's emotional center and leaves the audience unsettled in the best possible way. The film walks a line between justice and regret. No one walks away clean. The officers survive legally, but they carry guilt that never fades. Captain Queeg is exposed, but he is also pitied, not condemned. The film refuses to crown heroes or villains. What audiences didn't know is that this discomfort is intentional. The filmmakers want viewers to sit with uncertainty, to feel the weight of choices that cannot be undone. It isn't about proving who is right. It's about showing what every decision costs. Justice exists here, but it arrives without relief. Regret lingers in every frame, and that emotional imbalance, justice without triumph, is what makes the film feel painfully real long after the credits roll. The sound design heightens psychological pressure. This movie doesn't rely on loud music to create tension. It uses absence. Listen closely. Footsteps echo too sharply. Silence stretches just a second longer than expected. Background sounds intrude at uncomfortable moments. What audiences didn't know is how carefully the sound design mirrors mental strain. The ship never feels quiet. Even when no one speaks, something hums, creaks, or rattles in the background. It isn't noise, it's pressure. The soundscape traps the characters inside their own thoughts, amplifying anxiety without a single dramatic cue. The audience doesn't just watch stress unfold, they hear it. And once noticed, it's impossible to unhear. Bogart studied real officers for the role. Humphrey Bogart doesn't invent Captain Queeg from imagination. He observes. He studies officers known for rigid thinking and strained command. He watches posture, listening habits, and the way insecurity hides behind formality. He notes how authority can become brittle under constant pressure. What audiences didn't know is how much of Queeg is built from quiet observation rather than exaggeration. The pauses, the forced confidence, the moments where control feels rehearsed instead of natural. Bogart brings those details into the performance without explanation. Nothing is announced. Nothing is underlined. That realism makes Queeg unsettling, not because he is dramatic, but because he feels plausible. The film avoids easy villains. This story never gives the audience a simple target. Queeg isn't cruel. He isn't corrupt. He's overwhelmed, buried under responsibility he can't fully manage. The officers aren't traitors. They're conflicted professionals pushed into impossible decisions. What audiences didn't know is how deliberately the filmmakers resist simplification. There is no speech explaining who to blame, no moment that tells viewers how to feel. That restraint is risky. It invites disagreement. It invites debate. But it also makes the film endure. Because real life rarely offers clear villains. And this movie understands the truth long before it becomes fashionable to admit it. The camera work emphasizes isolation. Pay attention to how the film frames its characters. Bars cut across the screen. Railings divide faces. Doorways isolate figures within the same room. Captain Queeg is often framed alone, even when surrounded by his crew. What audiences didn't know is how deliberate this visual language is. The camera quietly reinforces emotional distance long before the mutiny occurs. Queeg is separated by composition, not dialogue. He is isolated visually, shot by shot, until his command feels like a prison he cannot escape. The camera never announces this choice. It simply repeats it. And over time, the isolation becomes impossible to ignore. The film influenced real military discussions. The influence doesn't stop at theaters. Quietly, persistently, the film enters professional conversations. Leadership seminars reference it. Training discussions mention it. Not officially, not in manuals, but in examples. What audiences didn't know is how often the movie is cited when discussing command pressure and psychological strain. not as instruction. As caution, it becomes a shared reference point, a story that illustrates how responsibility can erode judgment if left unchecked. The film doesn't claim answers. That's why it's useful. It raises questions leaders still struggle to resolve decades later. The mutiny is less important than the aftermath. The mutiny itself happens quickly. The aftermath lingers. What audiences didn't know is that the filmmakers intentionally minimize the act and expand the consequences. The real drama begins after the decision is made. The legal battles, the moral weight, the slow realization that survival doesn't equal peace. This shift reframes the story. The mutiny isn't the climax, it's the fracture point. Everything that follows is fallout. The film understands that choices don't end when action stops. They echo, they settle, they haunt. And that focus gives the story its lasting power. The film refused a simple moral. There is no speech that explains everything. No music swells to signal relief. No final image tells you how to judge what you've seen. What audiences didn't know is how radical this restraint is for its era. Many films of the time guide emotion carefully. This one steps back. It trusts the viewer. The film leaves space for disagreement, for discomfort, for reflection. It assumes the audience can handle uncertainty. That trust is risky, but it's also why the story continues to provoke conversation long after simpler films fade away. Its legacy grows with time. What once felt controversial now feels timeless. Authority under pressure, responsibility without support, the cost of obedience. These themes don't age. They sharpen. What audiences didn't know is how modern the film would become. Each generation rediscovers it through new experiences, finding fresh relevance in familiar scenes. The questions remain unanswered. That's the point. The legacy of the Caine Mutiny isn't just cinematic. It's psychological. It survives because it refuses to resolve the tension at its core. And that unresolved truth keeps pulling audiences back, decade after decade. The Caine Mutiny endures because it dares to ask a dangerous question. What happens when leadership breaks quietly? If you enjoyed uncovering what the screen never showed, like, subscribe, and remember this. The greatest mutinies don't begin with rebellion. They begin with silence.